So, hi everyone. My name's Dale, and I'm here with Manny Rodriguez from RideSD. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Manny, and I'm an organizer and advocate for RideSD. Our mission is to improve transportation in San Diego through public education, community events, and grassroots organizing.
Tell us a little bit why public transit became your number one issue. Because, when people think about San Diego, they think of the beach, they might think of the Padres if they care about baseball, but I hardly hear anyone talk about public transit.
Yeah, well, public transit is so important for any city. You know, in a city with millions of people, forcing everyone to drive is just a recipe for terrible traffic. And public transit is a solution to get people from point A to point B without causing terrible traffic and while also making it easier to move around. When you're on a train, you don't have to think about driving or watch out for pedestrians or watch out for cyclists. You can literally be on your phone or reading or doing an interview with friends instead of having to focus on the road. So it's a better way to move around, and I'm very passionate about making it work for more people in the city.
And so, you're a co founder of RideSD. What made you want to found this organization?
Yeah, so this organization came together when a lot of folks were kind of, a little bit frustrated with MTS and their ability to pay with, the fare. Like they have the scan code thing, which like doesn't work half the time, and then it seems like it's so obvious to just be able to pay with your credit card or mobile wallet. And so about a dozen of us were like, why don't we show up to an MTS board meeting and just like, ask them for that. And so we did. We showed up, and to our surprise, the chair at the time of the board was like, hey, these kids got a point, can we focus on fixing that? And a few months later they fixed it, and so we kind of decided, hey, let's get together and form an official group and continue to push the envelope for more transit improvements. So we created RideSD, and since then we've been able to push for a lot more improvements for transit and transportation generally around the county.
So, RideSD is the reason why we have Tap to Pay now, right? And so, what other big successes has RideSD managed to get for MTS and its riders?
Yeah, tap to pay is definitely our favorite one for sure. It's the one I use almost all the time. A lot of my ones that a lot of my friends use. One of the big wins that we're also pretty happy about is bus lanes throughout the city. We've actively been pushing for the city to incorporate more bus lanes in its community plan updates. So the current city administration is updating community plans around the city to allow for more homes, to allow for more parks, more open spaces, and we're jumping in those conversations saying, hey, this is great, you got to add bus lanes. And we've been able to get miles of bus lanes added into community plans by, showing up, sending letters, and getting our supporters across all these neighborhoods to show up and send in comments and saying, hey, I want these bus lanes. And the city listens to us, listens to our supporters, and they update those plans to have more bus lanes. And that's one of our other big wins. Another big win, also related to bus lanes, was working with the state senator Catherine Blakespear to expedite bus lanes in the coastal zone. The coastal zone has a lot of regulations, and it can be hard to build anything, even a bike lane or bus lane. And we saw that somebody a few years ago died on a street that was supposed to have a better bike lane, but there was no bike lane, and a cyclist got killed. And so Blakespear was like, hey, we need to make sure bike lanes and bus lanes don't get stuck in years of process at the Coastal Commission. And at first, her bill was just going to be about bike lanes, but we talked with her office and like, hey, could you also include bus lanes? And they worked with us to make that happen.
And so, is there like a specific street in San Diego that comes to mind where you're like, this needs a bus lane? Like, it's going to be the last thing we ever do?
Yeah, so several streets come to mind on that. I think Broadway in downtown is just like a no-brainer. There's not even parking on Broadway, so you're not even like taking away any parking. And there's like dozens of buses that go like at Broadway on peak time, and it's like it just makes a lot of sense to add. They got the Rapid 225, the Rapid 215, the Rapid 235, a lot of other bus routes, 2, 7. You got the Express commuter one that goes to Escondido. So there's all these buses on Broadway, and it just makes perfect sense to put a bus lane there. And when I was the chair of the planning board for downtown, we, supported that idea and requested the city make a plan for that, but still hasn't happened. But that's definitely one street where I'm like, oh, that just makes perfect sense. Other streets as well, for a lot of we need more bus lanes on the highways to make sure the buses, like the 225, can just skip through all the traffic. Because if the bus just gets the bus gets stuck in the same traffic as cars, it's not going to be a very compelling for people to ride the bus. We want to make sure that when people ride the bus, it skips through all the traffic and isn't as slow as a car.
And so, as I'm assuming a very frequent rider of the trolley and buses, what's like your favorite trolley stop on the station?
My favorite trolley stop is actually this one right here. We just passed it, but there was a very beautiful garden here at the Seaport Village trolley stop. In college, I was living a few blocks away, my last year from here, and so I would walk to here, take the green line to SDSU, and they just have a beautiful spiral garden and some like nice shady trees over there. This one for sure, favorite. Honorable mention has got to be Santa Fe Depot. Love it. Got the coaster, got the Amtrak, got all the trolley lines. Well, not the orange line. And beautiful station and all these high rises next to you. Makes you really feel like you're in an actual, modern city. So I love Santa Fe Depot. Love Seaport. Yeah, my favorites.
So there is, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but there is a huge budget deficit that the MTS is currently facing. Before we touch on that, there are actually two big agencies that deal with transit in San Diego County, the MTS and SANDAG. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, happy to answer that. That's a big question we get a lot. So what is MTS, what is SANDAG, and what is NCTD, which is another one? So SANDAG stands for San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG for short. Basically every city serves on a board that controls SANDAG, and SANDAG is responsible for building transit projects. So building new rail lines, building bus rapid transit, and once they build it, they hand it off to MTS or NCTD to operate. So SANDAG built the Blue Line extension to UCSD and UTC, and then they handed it off to MTS to operate. So MTS, which stands for Metropolitan Transit System, is responsible for running the transit. SANDAG builds the transit. And then NCTD stands for North County Transit District, which runs the transit in North County. So think Solana Beach, Encinitas, Carlsbad, parts of northern San Diego, Oceanside. NCTD operates in those areas.
And this year, SANDAG has actually gone through a lot of leadership changes. Would you say this changed the priorities of that organization?
Oh, absolutely. The previous CEO was very visionary, and really saw how transit can deliver for San Diego. The new CEO is coming from Caltrans, which is a freeway building agency, and already their new plans for the future is, less transit, more highways, and, he's kind of tearing an axe through the Purple Line, which is a regional heavy rail that would go from the border to job centers in Kearney Mesa, Sorrento Valley, and go through communities like City Heights and Chula Vista, which was projected to have high ridership, and it's very highly desired by so many people because so many people commute up to 5 and 805 from Chula Vista to get to those job centers. But the new CEO does not seem to be a fan of heavy rail, at least not as much as he is a fan of highways. And so we're seeing all that kind of being scaled back so that he can build more highways in the county.
And is this change in leadership in SANDAG at all related to the $120 million deficit MTS is facing? Or is that budget deficit from a bunch of different factors coming together?
Yeah, so SANDAG is separate from, and mostly, it's mostly separate from MTS in that way. So SANDAG does not control or does not dictate MTS how to spend its money per se. MTS has its own budget. It gets its own money from state and federal sources. SANDAG sometimes helps MTS get that money, but how MTS spends that money is their decision. And so how that budget deficit happened was not SANDAG's doing. It was more so the MTS got a lot of money from the state and federal governments during COVID to keep the frequencies going and to improve service, and that money was all one time, and so we're running out of that one-time money, and so we're hitting into this this gap where it's like, okay, we had all this one-time money to have all this service, but now it's gone, and now we have this gap that we need to make up for. And so that's how we got into that deficit. And also, on top of that, since 2020, inflation has gone up, the cost of labor has gone up, the cost of building anything has gone up. It's just more expensive to run a transit system than it was, and without any new money, MTS faces even more budget shortfalls.
And so, what was the logic behind giving MTS a one-time infusion of cash? Because they have actually increased frequency. I personally have noticed that ridership has gone up, the system overall is better, but they didn't give MTS a sustainable lifeline. So can you maybe explain to some of the people watching why that was?
Yeah, so a lot of that one-time funding was driven from COVID. So, during COVID, a lot of people, the whole world stopped. And the federal government and state governments also, during those few years, stepped in to provide transit agencies, not just MTS, but transit agencies all over the country with one-time funding. And so that's kind of what motivated the one-time funding. There were a lot of hopes that, like, okay, well, maybe maybe there will be more funding in the future, right? Maybe the presidential administration that is in charge will be, more transit friendly and keep the money going and so on. But, that was a lot of the hopes that were around the time, and I wasn't involved in those conversations. But that one-time funding was mostly as like to help the system and keep it going during those rough COVID years.
So it is true. Unfortunately, if you have not been paying attention, Trump is our president and he's not super transit friendly. So a lot of that one-time funding, to my knowledge, is not being replaced by the federal government.
I mean, no, it is not. And if anything, the federal government seems to be more focused on cutting funding to everything than funding anything.
True. I mean, yeah. And so last year there was an effort to remedy this budget deficit. I believe it was called Measure G, and it was a 0.25% sales tax increase, and it narrowly failed. So what is the plan going forward to remedy this budget deficit? I know that MTS right now is choosing between increasing fares or decreasing service, but does RideSD envision a way to fix this that doesn't involve either of those actions?
Yeah, so, it was really sad to see Measure G fail. Most of Measure G was going to be spent on projects, not so much in service or operations for MTS, and the money that MTS needs is for operations to keep the system going. And so what is the plan to get more operational funding? Well, MTS is considering a few things. They're considering raising the fares, as you said. They're considering restructuring the transit agency to make it more efficient and to cut down on costs where they can. RideSD would love to see the state prioritize transit more in its funding. The state dumps billions of dollars every year into agencies like Caltrans that just build freeways and cause more traffic and worsen air pollution and increase cancer in the state. And so RideSD and transit advocates, or just progressive transportation advocates everywhere, want to see the state stop blowing all this money on highways and actually improve and focus on the transit system. And so that's what RideSD wants to see.
And speaking of MTS restructuring, there is a perception, at least among the people that I've talked with, that MTS is inefficient, maybe not the best with money management. But as someone who does advocate for increased public transit and has a relationship with MTS, what's your perception on that take?
Yeah, I think MTS is doing better than other transit agencies. Other transit agencies are facing their fiscal cliffs already, because like I mentioned earlier, transit agencies around the country got all this one-time funding. MTS did better job managing it and planning for the long term than many other transit agencies. So while other transit agencies are already hitting a cliff, agencies like BART in the Bay Area, were almost done for this past year.
And Philly.
And Philly. Philly's also doing bad. MTS leadership has been able to, figure out how to make strategically have a longer runway. So that I can appreciate from the agency, that, more long-term strategic thinking that we're seeing from them.
And to add on to that, it's important to note that a lot of these changes that MTS is considering wouldn't be put in place until I believe 2028, right?
Yeah, 2028, fiscal year 2028. Maybe more, maybe less, depending how things change between now and then.
Um, so a big concern that I've gotten in my TikTok comments is people are obsessed with the idea that nobody pays for the trolley. Is that actually a big issue?
It is an issue in some ways, but also most of the MTS's revenue is like not coming from fare payments. It really helps, especially as this budget shortfall is coming. But RideSD is more focused on making sure that the state invests more in MTS, as opposed to trying to scrounge up the little that you can from enforcing more fares.
So we shouldn't really fucking care about this.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think it's really, if I am riding, if a friend is always driving me around, I want to make sure that I'm pitching in for gas and making sure I keep his car going. And I view it the same way with the train, and the trolley. Like I'm running it all the time. I want to make sure that I'm giving back in some way, and that paying the fares is a way to give back, kind of like giving your friend gas money for driving you around.
So RideSD's official position: fare hopping is not cool. Sorry, y'all. Um, so speaking of money, MTS is a tad bit broke, and there are a few projects that people really, really want to see. You mentioned one earlier with the Purple Line, but another project that people have talked about for decades at this point is the airport connector. Are we ever getting that? Like, what's the deal with that?
I believe in it. I think we can totally get it. It just requires some real leadership at Sandag, and I don't believe we have that right now. And also, the federal government is currently not exactly giving a lot of money to transit projects right now. It's a very tough time. So I think with the right leadership at Sandag and the right leadership at the federal government, that project can happen. And, so many people in this county want it to happen. People talk about all the time how annoying it is to drive to the airport and how it would make so much sense to have a train to the airport. So it's something we all want, and it's something that can happen with the right leaders in the right places.
And so, what would be the ideal alignment of an airport connector? Because I feel like every single article I read, it's always going like fucking all over downtown for some reason. What's RideSD's position? Like, where should it go?
Well, we're still thinking about that, and you should let us know. Like, should it go from downtown to the airport? Should it go from Old Town Transit Center to the airport? Should it go from somewhere else completely, entirely different to the airport? Yeah, let us know what you think. Like, where should the airport transit connection connect to?
I think it should go like literally just right in the middle of Coronado, straight to the airport.
Middle Coronado?
Yeah, because fuck them. Just kidding. No. So the other project that you mentioned is the Purple Line.
Yeah.
It would connect, the South Bay, San Ysidro to Chula Vista to City Heights. There is support for the Purple Line, but I know that the people in charge don't necessarily want it to go as far as RideSD wants it to go. Can you explain what RideSD wants and like what the current proposal is?
Yeah, so RideSD wants what the people want, and what the people want is a heavy rail connection from the South Bay to the job centers in Sorna Valley and Kearney Mesa. That gets you there in less than an hour. Like, there's some estimates that have it like 38 to 40 something minutes from like the border to Sorna Valley. Fantastic. There's so many people that live in the South Bay, especially Chula Vista, that have to drive up to 5 and 805 to get to those places, and the traffic is just terrible. No one's having a good time. Heavy rail just makes perfect sense. Current Sandag leadership, however, the new CEO, which came from Caltrans, a freeway building agency, is kind of shoving that aside to devote more time and resources to building highways instead.
And so, if the Purple Line was built, about how many people is it estimated to ride, transfer?
Like its annual ridership. That's a good question. I don't recall at the top of my head. Sandag recently did a study, but in their study they purposely left out spots like the border, like they purposely left it out of their studies so that they would get a lower ridership number per year. And that's obviously, to us, it's obviously them trying to prove it's not going to work. Because look at all these low ridership numbers. Like, well, yeah, but you also removed all these stops, especially the border, from the train. So no wonder your ridership is lower than expected. So I'd have to double check on some of the original estimates.
And so you mentioned a few times in some of your answers that a lot of people really do care about this issue, but I feel like it's not an issue that's ever front and center in like any news article or any news station outside of like transit oriented ones. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think transportation is something that's top of mind for everybody. Everybody sees traffic, everybody sees potholes, everybody sees how it's not safe or comfortable to walk or bike in their own neighborhood sometimes. And so transportation is top of mind, and I think we're starting to see more things come around that. RideSD, for example, now has a news service. Our supporters are growing. We're seeing other organizations, for example, Streets for All in LA. They've been able to mobilize and capture that public interest and be able to pass ballot measures to improve public safety on streets. And so I think that people do care about this, but it's just about tapping into that, and that's something RideSD is doing, and that's something other organizations are doing. And so keep following us and asking your questions, and we'll be here to loop you in.
And so does RideSD view public transit as like kind of a kitchen table issue? I know that cost of living is top of mind right now, and that's part of the reason why Measure G failed. But me personally, I don't have a car. I save a ton of money using public transit. Do you think more people in San Diego would be open to it once they realize how much money they would save?
Transportation is definitely a kitchen table issue. It's definitely a cost of living issue. I mean, owning a car is very expensive, especially a new car. You got monthly payments, you got gas, insurance, maintenance, so many other things that adds up. And that's money that could be used for groceries, that's money that could be used for childcare, that's money that can be used for, recreational activities or anything. I also don't own a car, and something that allows me to do is, dine in restaurants more often, like sometimes almost every day. But I've done the math, and like, okay, if I bought a car, I wouldn't have that much income anymore, or that much disposable income, and I have to start, making food at home every day, and also limiting other, recreational activities I do. So, if we can allow more people to get around by transit, which is way more affordable than a car, then more people have more income to spend on whatever they want.
And so it's also important to note that over 250,000 people ride the MTS every day. So it is one of the more well-used systems in America. And for those, hundreds of thousands of people that do rely on this system, now that there are looming cuts and there is this budget deficit, what is your advice to people who want to get involved but might not necessarily know how to, or they don't see themselves as like an activist or that type of person?
Yeah, well, follow Dale, follow us, RideSD. Keep in tune and keep engaging with this content, because we live in a democracy, and so the more people that are talking about something, the more people that are pushing a specific issue, the more action that we see on those issues. So keep following us, keep engaging with our content, sign up for our newsletters, and be there when we have calls to action or opportunities for you to send in comments. Join us in sending comments to your elected officials, your legislators. Maybe even join us in meeting with them, and voicing your opinion as to why transit matters to you.
And that is the last question that I had. I don't know if you had something else you wanted to say? Or?
Yeah, what's your favorite station?
Oh my God, my favorite station, I guess Santa Fe. Like, I think it's pretty, yeah. I like the buildings around it. I think the actual station itself is like kind of small, but oh well. Yeah. Yeah. Most people don't actually know that we have a train station, but we do. It's just no one uses it. Well, that's it. That's the interview. Yay.